Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology walkthrough video for Paper 1 of AQA A Level Sociology, looking at education with theory and methods. In this video, we're going to walk through how to do a 30-mark education policy essay question. Now, the aim of this video is to familiarise students with the format of a 30-mark question on educational policies. These questions include an item, and we're going to show students how to mine the item for information that they can use in the main body of their essay. We're also going to identify some of the concepts that can be used in answering the question and demonstrate how to structure a limited range of paragraphs. Just to be clear, students would need to do more than what we are putting in this video in terms of number of paragraphs in order to get into the top band. We're going to illustrate 3 paragraphs. Students may want to do more in order to gain the top band of the mark scheme. We're also going to highlight key skills like analysis and evaluation in our writing. But let's look at the question first of all. Now, this question has been created by Tutor to You for the purposes of this video, but it does reflect the style of questions that appear on the AQA A Level Paper 1 in Sociology on education and theory and methods. This question is focusing specifically on educational policies and their impacts on equality of opportunity. As students would see on a normal exam, there is an item and a question. The item states that governments have introduced a variety of educational policies that appear to address differences in students' backgrounds. These include funding for schools in certain areas, support for students from low-income families, and efforts to encourage wider participation in education. These changes suggest that reducing barriers to success has been an important goal of educational policy. The second paragraph states that, however, some sociologists argue that the main purpose of educational policy has been to increase competition and parental choice, rather than promote equal opportunities. And the question below asks students to apply material from item B and their knowledge and evaluate the view that the main purpose of educational policy has been to promote equality of opportunity. Now, we've selected this phrase equality of opportunity because it comes directly from the AQA A Level specification, where it looks at policies that are tackling equality of opportunity and outcome. More commonly, this is seen as being tackling inequalities, whether that be social class, gender, or ethnic inequalities within the education system. And what we can see when we decode the question is that this is quite a broad range of educational policies that can be used. So first of all, what students should do is look at decoding the question. So we can see here that the question says apply material from item B and your knowledge, evaluate the view that the main purpose of educational policy has been to promote equality of opportunity. Now, the wording of this question is incredibly important because students could go one of 2 ways with this. They could spend most of their essay discussing policies that promote equality of opportunity, or they could create a balanced debate. So what we need to do is we need to decode the question to see which of those 2 types of essay you may look to do. Well, first of all, this phrase evaluate the view. If it had said evaluate the impacts of educational policies to promote equality of opportunity, the vast majority of this essay would be on educational policies that promote equality of opportunity. But as it says evaluate the view, we need to present a range of views on this statement. Evaluate the view is a debate question. Ideally, students would present a balanced range of viewpoints that suggest that yes, the main purpose of educational policy has been to promote equality of opportunity, with 1 or 2 opposing views that suggest that actually the main purpose of educational policy has been to promote something else. Now, this second part of it, educational policy has been to promote equality of opportunity. Now, this could quite easily have been equality of outcome, but essentially what we're looking at is policies that looked to create a level playing field for pupils. So we're focused here on tackling class, gender and ethnic inequalities. We may argue that these still exist, but what have governments done to try and minimise these inequalities? Now, it doesn't mention a specific group, so we can look at policies that have tackled class inequality, gender inequality, and ethnic inequality. And we can also look at policies that tackle several of, and this is linked in more with like contemporary sociology, where we tackle these intersections of class, gender, and ethnicity. So if we start for a moment, we think about some of the policies that have promoted equality of opportunity for students. And if we look at these 6 policies that we're putting up on the screen here, which of these promote equality of opportunity? We can argue that pupil premium does promote equality of opportunity, because what it does is provide additional funding for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, which gives them a level playing field with other pupils. The effectiveness of pupil premium is what we would evaluate in our response. League tables. Now, these are possibly less likely to promote equality of opportunity because they are promoting competition between schools. League tables, of course, came about as part of the Education Reform Act. And one of the key things from the Education Reform Act, which is often ignored, is the desegregation of subjects. This is where boys and girls would be able to do the same subjects as each other. So no more girls being sifted off into domestic science and boys being into design and technology. This is seen as promoting equality of opportunity for males and females. Similarly, we could have used GIST and WISE here, girls in science and technology, women in science and engineering, and how it promoted equality of opportunity for girls in the sciences. Comprehensives, we would argue, promoted equality of opportunity. Now, this is quite a dated policy. Obviously, it's been superseded by many other policies such as academisation, and some areas never went to comprehensives at all and maintained the tripartite system, but it did look to promote equality of opportunity by giving everybody the same education under the same roof. Again, how effective comprehensives were at creating equality of opportunity is debatable, and this is something that students would evaluate. Sure Start can be seen as an example of promoting equality of opportunity, giving children from disadvantaged backgrounds preschool learning, which would help them to develop the social and cognitive skills that they would need when they went to school, which would give them a sure start in education, and widening participation programs. These can also be seen as promoting equality of opportunity, where universities would look to target groups that were traditionally underrepresented in higher education and give them support in order to gain university admission. And again, we would look to say, how effective were these policies? The next thing we're going to look at is mining the item. The item is a stimulus for students. It will help them to think about some of the ways in which educational policy has looked to promote equal opportunities. And it will also, as we see in the second paragraph, look at alternative views as to whether the main purpose of educational policy was to promote equal opportunities. When we mine the item, we go through the item looking for hooks that we can possibly link to other policies that were introduced by governments over the last 60 or 70 years that look to tackle inequality of opportunity. So I've highlighted some that we might use here. You may also take some of these hooks and develop them in other ways. The first hook I've found here is funding for schools in certain areas. Now, this can be linked into a couple of different policies: the creation of city academies under New Labour, or education action zones, both of which gave schools additional funding in disadvantaged areas to tackle the inequalities of opportunity that came on the basis of deprivation. We can also look at support for students from lower income families. Now, this can be either direct to the school, such as pupil premium, or it can be direct to the family, so things like EMA or bursaries. That is money that was paid to pupils to get them to continue in education from 16 to 18. We can also look here, efforts to encourage wider participation in education, and we can talk about widening participation policies in higher education. We can also talk about specific policies from the early 80s and early 90s, Aim High and Aim Higher, that look to provide opportunities for groups that were traditionally underrepresented in higher education. Now we move on to our second paragraph. Now our second paragraph usually hints at the ways in which we can evaluate or suggests an alternative approach to the question. So here it says, however, some sociologists argue the main purpose of educational policy has been to increase competition and parental choice. So this is strongly hinting at marketization policies. Now this might be in a debate question that you include one or two paragraphs about other policies that would suggest that the main purpose of educational policy was not tackling equality of opportunity. Instead, it was to create an education market, and that's hinted at in the item. Now, a bit of exam gold for you here. In the extended essays, this is the 20 and 30 mark essays, students should look to go beyond the material that is in the item to show a wider range of sociological knowledge about the topic area. Most items will have 3, maybe 4 hints at most that you can use to answer the question, but it's not an essay plan. It is simply a stimulus for students to use to show their knowledge of the topic area. To get into that top level, the 25 to 30 or the 17 to 20, students should look to go beyond what is in the item and introduce something else that they know about. One of the most commonly asked questions that we get asked when we do the grade boosters or the live streams is, should you put an introduction in an essay? Introductions can be used, introductions cannot be used. It doesn't really impact on the quality of the essay. You can see very good essays that don't have an introduction. You can see very bad essays that do have an introduction. For me, I always advise students that an introduction can be useful to help them to organize their thoughts and set out some of the different sides of the debate, particularly under time conditions. You certainly don't want to spend a long time on an introduction. It might be that you just introduce 1 or 2 concepts and say, this is what I'm going to discuss in the essay. It should be no more than 2 or 3 lines, really. For me, in an essay on educational policy, you may just simply discuss some of the different aims of educational policy in general. So I've put up an example here. Educational policies have looked to tackle several issues within the education system, one of which is promoting equal opportunities for students from traditional marginalised groups. For example, girls' academic achievement was historically lower than boys, whilst there have been social class and ethnic differences in the achievements of different social class as a result of barriers to success. All I've done here is talked about educational policy and say it has several functions, one of which is promoting equal opportunities. Quite simply, this wouldn't gain me many marks, but really it has set the scene. It has helped me to understand what I need to write in the essay. You can use them, you cannot use them. It doesn't make a lot of difference. It is down to personal preference, really. Now, another bit of exam goal before we look at how to structure some of our paragraphs. A good way to analyse and evaluate educational policies is to outline the aim of the policy. What was the impact of the policy? Were there any indirect impacts? Did it cause any other issues? And how effective it was in meeting its aims. And this is key to your evaluation. How effective was it in meeting its aims? Did it have any indirect impacts? Key things to think about when you're evaluating a policy. So we're going to look at a sample paragraph here. Now, lots of students use appeal format. I've not really gone with appeal format in this one. I've just basically gone through a logical chain of reasoning where I will introduce a policy I will explain how that policy worked, and then I will look to evaluate it. So one argument in favour of the view of educational policy as aimed to promote equality of opportunity is that some policies have tried to reduce the disadvantages faced by students from lower income backgrounds. So I've referenced the item here, talking about lower income backgrounds, and what I've done really is I've applied it to the demands of the question by restating the question, showing the examiner that I am focused on the question because I'm talking about promoting equality of opportunity. Now I will bring in a policy. So for example, policies such as pupil premium aim to support students who may struggle due to financial hardship. Now I've introduced the policy. Now in my analysis, I've got to explain how it does that. Pupil premium provides schools with additional funding for pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds, such as living in areas of deprivation, having special educational needs, or being in receipt of free school meals. So this is what pupil premium does. So I've shown the examiner I know what pupil premium is, I know how it works. Now I need to be able to make a judgment on how effective pupil premium was. A little bit more on what it does. These resources can be used by schools to purchase textbooks, laptops, and provide extracurricular activities for pupils who otherwise would not be able to afford them. And now my evaluation. However, critics argue that the impact of these policies has been limited. Ofsted has reported that pupil premium funding is not always used effectively by schools, and the attainment gap remains wide, suggesting that deeper structural inequalities are not being addressed. Now I'm going to look a little bit closer at that evaluation to show you some of the kind of tips that we might use to make sure our evaluation is explicit. So an explicit evaluation is one that is linked to the points that are made in the main body of the paragraph. So in the main body, we talked about pupil premium and how it provides resources for students. So in order to evaluate the impact of pupil premium, what we might need to do is suggest, does it provide resources for students? And we need to link specifically to pupil premium. The first thing I've done is I've signposted that I'm evaluating. Now the word however doesn't always mean you're evaluating, but it is a really useful signpost to an examiner that you are changing direction, that you are looking to make a judgment on what you've written. Critics argue that the impact of these policies has been limited. So this is a judgment. The impact of the policies has been limited. Why has it been limited? Well, Ofsted, so I'm using a little bit of research here, has reported that pupil premium funding is not always used effectively by schools. So again, this is a link to both pupil premium and providing resources for students. And the attainment gap remains wide, suggesting that deeper structural inequalities are not being addressed. This is an explicit evaluation where I have made my point and tied it back to what's already been mentioned in the main body of the paragraph. This idea that pupil premium funding is not always used effectively, and I have some research to back that up by stating it's come from Ofsted. Look at a second sample paragraph, and I've gone here. Another way in which educational policy has promoted equality of opportunity is through comprehensive education. So here I've identified straight away my policy. I've now explained what the aim of the comprehensive system is. The introduction of comprehensive schools in the 1960s replaced the tripartite system, which had reinforced class divisions by separating students into grammar, technical or secondary modern schools based upon the 11+ exam. And comprehensive schools aim to provide a more equal education by allowing students of all abilities and backgrounds to attend the same schools, thus reducing institutional inequality. So you can see here I'm showing a good knowledge of comprehensive education, what it replaced, what it aimed to do. Let's look at some of the impacts. However, critics argue that comprehensives still reproduce class inequality through setting and streaming, which often reflects social class divisions, for example through setting and streaming of pupils based upon their perceived ability. Also, the introduction of catchment areas can lead to selection by mortgage, with more affluent areas having better performing schools and a limited amount of social mixing between classes. If we look at our explicit evaluation in here, you can see that the main points that were made were comprehensive education and that all pupils were treated the same. However, again, signposting that we're evaluating, critics argue that comprehensives still reproduced class inequality, so not all pupils weren't all treated the same. They were put into different sets and streams, which shows that we are linking back to the main point that has been made, which often reflects social class divisions, for example through setting and streaming of pupils based upon perceived ability. We can also look at the development of our evaluation, where we're talking about how pupils are treated the same. However, they're not treated the same. They're treated the same as pupils who are in the same area as them. What they found is middle class schools attracted middle class pupils because they were based in middle class areas, whereas working class comprehensives attracted working class pupils who lived in working class areas. Now, as we've seen, this is a debate, so what we need to do is we need to present an alternative view. Now, presenting an alternative view, we've hinted already at marketisation through the item, so we're going to develop that point there. We could also have suggested that one of the main purposes of education is to keep up with the global job market, or one of the main purposes of educational policy has been to prepare students for the demands of the economy. We've gone with marketisation because it's what was mentioned in the paragraph, and marketisation can be seen as being the dominant trend in educational policy, particularly over the last 40 years. We'll start our paragraph by saying, however, some sociologists argue that the main focus of educational policy has not been equality, but rather marketisation and competition. From the 1988 Education Reform Act onwards, policies such as league tables, open enrolment and parental choice have been designed to create an education market. Now we're going to put in some research as part of our analysis to back up and show our deeper knowledge. Ball argues that such policies benefit middle-class families who have the resources to exploit school choice, thus reinforcing rather than reducing inequality. We could have gone further and talked about Gowitz's research into skilled choosers, semi-skilled choosers and local choosers. Now we're going to back it up a little bit more by saying this view is supported by statistics showing that schools in wealthier areas tend to perform better in league tables, attracting more middle class parents and creating a cycle of advantage. And then our evaluation, some argue that increased transparency through league tables and Ofsted reports have pressured schools to improve, which can benefit all students regardless of their social background. So we are putting forward an alternative view that's saying marketisation can actually have an impact on equality of opportunity. Whether you agree with that or not, that is one view that is put forward by sociologists, suggesting that if all schools improve, then it actually increases the level of opportunity for all pupils. Now we've shown you 3 paragraphs that you could use in this type of essay, but to get to higher levels of the mark scheme, that 25 to 30 level, students need to show a range and depth of sociological knowledge in their responses. Now this is very much dependent upon the range of material that is available and can differ. I would suggest that a safe range to display for a 30 marker would be 5 to 6 points, which covers different perspectives, concepts and ideas. However, this is not a predetermined number. You could display 4 points that are very well developed, that has far more in-depth analysis and well-developed evaluation that could also score in that 25 to 30 level because it is displaying a full range. We can talk about a range being 5 to 6 points, but you also need consistent analysis and evaluation in those points to get the depth. You need to make judgments on the effectiveness of the arguments presented and show clear analysis to show both range and depth to get yourself into the higher levels of the mark scheme. The final stage is to come up with a conclusion. Now on the mark scheme, it does say that conclusions can be drawn throughout. And these mini conclusions are your evaluations. It's where you've made a judgment on whether the argument that has been put forward is an effective argument or not. When it comes to a debate essay, you need to make a judgment on whether the main view of the debate is correct or not. Now, the item will hint at ways in which the main view is limited, as we've seen in this item where it talks about marketisation policies, and you can use this in the conclusion to help you to come up with a suitable conclusion. In some debate questions, there will be a natural midpoint whereby there is some truth in the argument, but there is a significant alternative present. I'm going to show you an example of a conclusion that I've written. And what we will see is where we've made several judgments within this conclusion. So in conclusion, while many educational policies have aimed to improve access and reduce barriers, their effectiveness in promoting genuine equality of opportunity is debatable. So there's my first judgment. This is a debate. We cannot clearly say that the main purpose of educational policy has been to promote equality of opportunity. Some policies have had positive effects, particularly in terms of financial support and inclusive schooling. However, other reforms driven by market forces and neoliberal ideologies have tended to benefit those who are already advantaged. This is my second judgment. We are saying that many educational policies do something completely different and don't promote equality of opportunity, but actually increase the advantage on certain groups in society. So I've weighed up those two judgments and come up with a third one. Therefore, it's more accurate to say that equality of opportunity has been one aim among others, rather than the main purpose of educational policy. And this is my third judgment that I've made in that conclusion. What I am doing is I'm weighing up the evidence that I have presented already and coming to a conclusion that we cannot say that the main purpose of educational policy is to promote equality of opportunity. We can say it is one aim of educational policy rather than being the main aim. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology Paper 1 walkthrough for AQA A Level Sociology, looking at how to tackle a 30-mark educational policy essay. Thanks for watching.